The UK's Finance Minister stood in front of Parliament on Wednesday to give his annual budget at a time when the yield on UK government bonds are close to all-time lows, but rating agencies have been warning the UK has a major job on its hands to rebalance the books. Ross Walker from RBS is a regular contributor on British TV, and I'm delighted to be joined by him now. Ross, who was the budget aimed at, the electorate of the Conservative Party or the rating agencies and financial markets?
Well, there are always a number of audiences. I think the key principle is still that the government wants to continue with its fiscal consolidation program and to stick to the course that it set out back in June 2010 when it came into office of the steady reduction in the deficit. So that is the overriding priority. Within those overall constraints, we began to see some tax policy changes. In themselves, they're on too small a scale to make any major or immediate difference to the wider macroeconomy, but I think they do provide a signal of future policy direction. So we've seen further spending cuts alongside cuts in personal tax allowances, bringing down the top rate of income tax from next year, and corporation tax cuts. So measures that are geared eventually towards boosting incentives.
One of the most controversial announcements from the budget was the reduction of the top rate of tax to 45% from 50%. George Osborne said there was no fiscal benefit from the higher rate of tax, but does the evidence back him up?
Yes, I mean, there are. We had earlier in the day public finances data for the month of February, and you can see in those numbers quite a sharp fall in income tax receipts. We've had general weakness in the income tax numbers over the past year. Now, some of this is just a general reflection of relatively subdued economic conditions. There isn't much wage inflation in the UK at the moment, but I think it also alludes to revenue weakness coming from higher, more mobile earners, and that seems to be the conclusion of both revenue and customs and also the independent OBR. So, you will never know what the counterfactual is in terms of what revenues would have been from those higher, more mobile earners in the absence of the 50p rate, but it certainly doesn't seem to have generated much by way of additional income. And when you take those income tax rates plus the national insurance rates, which is just income tax by another name, the highest earners were facing marginal tax rates of 52%, which in an international context is relatively high, and is a factor I think which does send unfavourable signals in terms of the general business environment in the UK.
During the budget, George Osborne pointed out the UK exports more to Ireland than it does to India, Brazil and China combined. Going forward, is the export sector one of the key areas of growth for the UK if it's to reorientate its economy?
It is. The fiscal consolidation process is going to run through towards the end of this decade. The debt reduction process that is happening in the household sector is going to endure for a similar length of time. So the main driver for the UK economy is the corporate sector. So business investments, expenditure, and exports, and those two components at this stage are quite heavily intertwined, because a lot of the investment will result from stronger exports, stronger external demand. So the trade side of things is going to be more important. It has been a little bit disappointing over the last year or 18 months. Sterling fell quite sharply at the end of 2008. That's brought some benefits in terms of competitiveness. But the real terms export growth the UK has seen over the last couple of years has been below what most forecasters had predicted. Now some of that reflects weaker than expected growth in the euro area, which is still the UK's main export market. It accounts for the euro area almost half of UK trade. But the point I think the Chancellor was emphasising was that the UK simply structurally does not do enough business with the fastest growing parts of the world, China, India, those emerging Asian economies. And therefore a reorientation is required. But those structural shifts always take time So whilst I think we'll see some modest improvement over the next year or so, this is a longer-term structural adjustment that needs to occur.
The Bank of England meeting minutes were also released on Wednesday and showed 2 members of the MPC wanted to increase stimulus. Aren't they potentially playing a dangerous game with inflation, especially considering the oil price could remain elevated for a while yet?
Well, the UK inflation picture has looked a little bit better since the autumn. We've seen CPI come down by almost 2 percentage points. It's still above its target, but it's going to fall further in the coming months. As you say, the oil price rises do present a risk. Similarly, some of the very dry weather conditions mean there are upside risks for a number of soft commodities, foodstuffs. But the domestic fundamentals in the UK are still that wage inflation is pretty muted. The employment picture is rather stagnant. So it's difficult to see at this stage a strong demand pressures pushing up the overall price level. Clearly, over the next few months, we're going to see significant changes in relative prices. Petrol, for example, is going to rise quite sharply, it seems. But that may just squeeze spending power and pricing elsewhere. So at this point in time, I think the policy balance is about right. We're probably approaching the end of monetary stimulus. We may get some more quantitative easing in the second half of this year, but I think the end game is in sight for that easing. Having said that, I think we're still some way away from policy tightening or actively withdrawing that stimulus.
The yields on gilts remain very low. What has the UK managed to do better than some of its European neighbours like France?
Well, I think in terms of the sovereign debt debate and the safe haven status, I think the difference really between the UK and some other European countries is that you have had a new government in place, elected with a mandate to reduce the deficit and pursue a fiscal tightening process. So the political risk has diminished. Most of the opinion polls in the UK, whilst there's not exactly tremendous public enthusiasm for fiscal austerity, there is an acceptance that these deficits have to be brought down. So I think in that respect that there is a plan in place. It is being delivered. It's still early days, but the deficit is coming down broadly in line with projections, and there is a political will to address this. And I think that's probably the difference, because the economic and fiscal backdrop is in many cases, in the case of UK and France, very similar. So it's a policy and political dimension that is different.
OK, thank you, Ross. We'll keep you updated on the markets and latest FX developments here on Dukascopy TV. But for now, goodbye.